students, welcome to the PD Life Science Academy for the Happy Learning. NEET एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन जे विद्यार्थी करत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी बेसिक कन्सेप्ट लर्निंग आणि लिंकिंग ऑफ कन्सेप्ट हे जेवढे गरजेचे आहे तेवढेच NCERT बुकमधील चॅप्टरचे कंटेंट रीड करणे आवश्यक आहे. हे करत असताना फक्त एक रीडिंग करून चालणार नाही, मल्टिपल टाइम्स रिव्हिजन होणे गरजेचे आहे. यात टाळाटाळ करणे चांगले नव्हे. आपण सेट केलेले टार्गेट अचीव करण्यासाठी PD लाईफ सायन्स अकॅडमीने सर्व स्टुडंटसाठी जे नीट एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन करीत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी 21 डे रीडिंग चॅलेंजची सुरुवात केली आहे. रोज एका चॅप्टरचे रीडिंग आपण कंप्लीट करणार आहोत. हे चॅलेंज ज्या विद्यार्थ्यांनी ॲक्सेप्ट केले आहे त्यांनी त्यांचे डेली टार्गेट अचीव केल्यावर कॉमेंट करून सांगायचे आहे. सो लेट्स गेट रेडी फॉर टेकिंग रीडिंग चॅलेंज. ऑल द व्हेरी बेस्ट. थँक यू. 21 डे बायोलॉजी रीडिंग चॅलेंज, डे 3 रीडिंग चॅलेंज, chapter number 3 from NCERT biology textbook of 11th standard. Chapter number 3, plant kingdom. In the previous chapter we look at the broad classification of living organisms under the system proposed by the Whittaker in 1969, wherein the suggested in a 5 kingdom classification wise the Monera, Protista, Fungi, Animalia and Plantae. In this chapter we will deal in the detail with a further classification within the kingdom Plantae, popularly known as the plant kingdom. We must stress here that our understanding of the plant kingdom has changed over the time. Fungi and the members of Monera and the Protista having a cell wall have now been included from the Plantae through earlier classification place them in a same kingdom. So the cyanobacteria that are also referred to as the blue-green algae are not algae anymore. In this chapter we will describe the algae, Bryophytes, Pteridophytes, Gymnosperms and Angiosperms under the Plantae. Let us also look at the classification within the Angiosperm to understand the some of the concern that influence the classification system. The earliest system of classification used only gross superficial morphological characters such as the habitat, color, number, shape of leaves, etc. They were based mainly on the vegetative characters or on the androecium structure, that is the system given by the lineage. Such a system were the artificial and they separated the closely related species since they were based on a few characteristics. Also the artificial system gave the equal weightage to the vegetative and the sexual characteristics, and this is not acceptable since we know that often a vegetative characters are more easily affected by the environment. As against this, the natural classification systems developed which were based on the natural affinities among the organisms and consider not only the external features but also the internal features like the ultrastructure, anatomy, embryology, phytochemistry, etc. Such a classification for the flowering plant was given by the George Bentham and the Joseph Dalton Hooker. At present, phylogenetic classification system based on the evolutionary relationship between the various organisms are acceptable. This assumes that the organism belonging to the same taxa have the common ancestor. We now use the information from the many other sources to help the resolve the difficulties in classification. This becomes the more important when there is no supporting fossil evidences. Numerical taxonomy, which is the now easily carried out using the computers, is based on the observable characters. Number and codes are assigned to all the characters and the data are then processed. In this way, each character is given equal importance and at the same time, hundreds of the characters can be considered. The cytotaxonomy that is based on the cytological information like the chromosome number, structures, behavior and the chemotaxonomy that uses the chemical constituents of the plant to resolve the confusions are also used by the taxonomists these days. Now the 3.1 first point is the algae. Algae are the chlorophyll bearing simple thalloid autotrophic and largely aquatic both freshwater and the marine organism. They occur in a variety of other habitats, moist stones, soil and wood. Some of them are also in association with the fungi in lichen and animals, for example on the sloth bears. The forms and the size of the algae are highly variable, ranging from the colonial form like the Liverworts and the filamentous form like the Yellowthrics and Spirogyra. A few marine forms such as the kelp forms a massive plant bodies. The algae reproduce by the vegetative, asexual and sexual method. Vegetative reproduction by fragmentation. Each fragment develops into a thallus. Asexual reproduction is by reproduction of the different types of spores, the most common being the zoospores. They are flagellated, that is the motile, and on germination gives rise to new plants. Sexual reproduction takes place through the fusion of the two gametes. These gametes can be flagellated and similar in a size as in the Yellowthrics, or non-flagellated, that is the non-motile, but similar in size as in the Spirogyra. Such a reproduction is called as isogamous. The fusion of the two gametes this similar in size as in the species of the Edorina is termed as an isogamous. The fusion between the one large and the non-motile, that is the static female gamete, and the smaller motile male gamete is termed as oogamous. For example, the Liverworts and the fucus. Now the examples of the green algae are the Liverworts and the Yellowthrics, whereas the brown algae is the Laminaria, fucus and Dictyota. Red algae is the Porphyra and the Polysiphonia. Algae are useful to the man in a variety of the ways. At least a half of the total carbon dioxide fixation on the earth is carried out by the algae through the photosynthesis. Being the photosynthetic, they increase the level of the dissolved oxygen in their immediate environment. They are the paramount importance as a primary producers of energy-rich components which forms the basis of the food cycle of all aquatic animals. Many species of the Porphyra, Laminaria and Sargassum are among the 70 species of the marine algae used as a food. Certain marine brown and the red algae produces the large amount of the hydrocolloids, that is the water holding substances, for example the algine from the brown algae and carrageenan from the red algae, which are used as a commercially. Agar, one of the commercial products obtained from the Gelidium and the Glacidaria, are used to grow the microbes and in the preparation of the ice creams and jellies. The chlorella, a unicellular algae rich in a protein, is used as a food supplement even by a space travelers. The algae are divided into the three main classes. First is a Chlorophyceae, second is a Phaeophyceae and third is a Rhodophyceae. Now 3.1.1 is a Chlorophyceae. The members of the Chlorophyceae are commonly called as a green algae. The plant body may be unicellular, colonial or filamentous. They are usually grass green due to the dominance of the pigment chlorophyll A and the chlorophyll B. The pigment are the localized in the definite chloroplast. The chloroplast may be discoid, plate-like, reticulate, cup-shaped, spiral or ribbon-shaped in a different species. Most of the members have one or the more storage bodies called as a pyrenoids located in a chloroplast. Pyrenoids contain the protein beside the starch. Some algae may store the food in the form of the oil droplets. Green algae usually have the rigid cell wall made up of the inner layer of the cellulose and an outer layer of the pectose. Vegetative reproduction usually takes place by the fragmentation or by the formation of the different types of the spores. Asexual reproduction is by the flagellated zoospores produced in the zoosporangia, and the sexual reproduction shows the considerable variation in the types and formation of the sex cells, and it may be the isogamous, anisogamous or oogamous. Some commonly found green algae are the Chlamydomonas, Liverworts, Yellowthreads, Spirogyra and Chara. Now the 3.1.2 is a Pteridophytes. The members of Pteridophytes or the brown algae are found primarily in a marine habitat. They show the great variation in the size and forms, and they range from the simple branch filamentous forms, for example ectocarpus, to profusely branched forms as represented by the kelp, which may reach a height of the 100 meters. And they possess the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll C, carotenoids and xanthophylls. They vary in color from the olive green to the various shades of the brown depending upon the amount of xanthophyll pigments, fucoxanthin, present in them. The food is stored as a complex carbohydrate which may be in the form of the laminaria or mannitol. The vegetative cell have a cellulosic wall usually covered on outside of the gelatinous coating of algae. The protoplast contains, in addition to the plastids, a centrally located vacuole and nucleus. Plant body is usually attached to the substratum by the holdfast and has a stalk. The stiff and the leaf-like photosynthetic organ, the frond. The vegetative reproduction takes place by the fragmentation. Asexual reproduction is in most brown algae is by biflagellated zoospores that are the pear-shaped and have the two unequal laterally attached flagella. Sexual reproduction may be isogamous, anisogamous or oogamous. Union of the gamete may take place in water or within the oogonium, that is the oogamous species. The gametes are the pyriform, that is the pear-shaped, and bears a two laterally attached flagella. The commonly forms are the ectocarpus, dictyota, laminaria, sargassum and the fucus. Now the 3.1.3 is a Rhodophytes. The members of the Rhodophytes are commonly called as a red algae because of the predominance of the red pigment or phycoerythrin in their body, and majority of the red algae are the marine with a greater concentration found in the warmer areas. They occur in a both well lightened region close to the surface of the water and also at the great depth of the ocean where the relatively little light penetrates. The red thalli of the most red algae are multicellular. Some of them have the complex body organization. The food is stored as a Floridian starch, which is very similar to the amylopectin and the glycogen in a structure. The red algae usually reproduce vegetatively by the fragmentation, and they reproduce asexually by the non-motile spores and the sexually by the non-motile gametes. The sexual reproduction is oogamous and accompanied by the complex post-fertilization development. The common members are the Polysiphonia, Porphyra, Gracilaria and Giladium. Now the table number 3.1, the division of algae and their main characteristic. Now the common names and major. Chlorophytes is also known as a green algae. Major pigment are the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. Store food is a starch. Cell wall is made by cellulose. Flagella number and the position of insertion is a 2 to 8 flagella and are equal and apical position, and habitat is a fresh water, brackish water and the salty water. Pteridophytes are the brown algae. Chlorophyll A, C and fucoxanthin is present. Store food is a mannitol and laminaria, whereas the cell wall made by the cellulose and algine. Flagella are unequal in position and laterally placed. whereas habitat is a fresh water, very rare. Fresh water are very rare, brackish water and the salty water. Rhodophytes are known as a red algae, and chlorophyll pigments are the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll D, phycoerythrins are present. Store food is a Floridian starch, cell wall is a cellulose, pectin and the polysulfate esters are present. Flagella are absent in Rhodophytes. Now habitat is a fresh water. Some are the fresh water, for example the Bryophytes, and brackish water, salt water are mostly forms. Now the 3.2 is a Bryophytes. Bryophytes include the various mosses and liverworts that are found commonly growing in the moist shaded areas in the hills. Now the Bryophytes, a liverwort are the, for example is a Markensia, and the mosses are the Funaria and the Sphagnum. The Bryophytes are also called as amphibians of the plant kingdom because these plants can live in a soil but are depending on the water for the sexual reproduction. They usually occurs in a damp, humid and shaded localities, and they play an important role in a plant succession on a bare rocks or soil. The plant body of the Bryophytes are the more differentiated than that of the algae. It is a thallus-like and prostrate or erect, and attracts to the substratum by unicellular or multicellular rhizoids. They lack the true roots, stems and the leaves. They may possess the root-like, leaf-like and the stem-like structures. The main plant body of the Bryophytes is a haploid. It produces the gametes and hence is called as a gametophyte. The sex organ in the Bryophytes are the multicellular. The male sex organ is called as the antheridium, and they produce the biflagellate antherozoids. The female sex organ called as the archegonium is a flask shaped and produces the single egg. The antherozoids are released into the water where they come in contact with the archegonium. The antherozoid fuse with the egg to produce the zygote, and zygote do not undergo the reduction of cell division immediately. They produce a multicellular body called as the sporophytes. The sporophyte is not free living but attached to the photosynthetic gametophyte and derive a nourishment from it. Some cells of the sporophyte undergoes the reductional division, that is the meiosis, to produce the haploid spores. These spores germinate to produce the gametophyte. The Bryophyte in general of the little economical importance, but some mosses provides the food for the herbaceous mammals, birds and the other animals. The species of the sphagnum mosses provides the peat that have long been used as a fuel and as a packing material for the transshipping of the living material because of their capacity to hold the water. The mosses along with the lichens are the first organism to colonize the rocks and hence area of the greater ecological importance. They decompose the rocks, making the substrate suitable for the growth of the higher plant. Since the mosses form the dense mats on the soil, they reduce the impact of falling rains and prevent the soil erosion. The Bryophytes are divided into the liverworts and the mosses. Now the 3.2.1 is a liverwort. The liverworts grows usually in a moist, shady habitat such as the banks of the streams, marshy grounds, damp soils, bank of the trees and the deep in the woods. The plant body of the liverwort is a thalloids, for example the Markensia. The thallus is a dorsiventral and closely appressed to the substrate. The leafy members have a tiny leaf-like appendages in 2 rows of the stem-like structures. Asexual reproduction in the liverwort takes place by the fragmentation of the thalli or by the formation of the specialized structure called as a gymi. Singularly is a gyma. Gyma are a green multicellular asexual birds which develops in a small receptacle called as a gyma cup located on the thalli. The gyma becomes detached from the parent body and germinate to form a new individual. During the sexual reproduction, male and the female sex organs are produced either on the same or on the different thalli. This sporophyte is differentiated into the food seta and the capsule. After meiosis, the spores are produced within the capsule. These spores are germinate to form a free-living gametophyte. Now the 3.2.2 is a meiosis. The predominant stage of the living life cycle of the moss is a gametophyte, which consists of the two stages. The first stage is the protonema stage, which develops directly from the spore, and it is a creeping, green, branched and the frequently filamentous stage. The second stage is the leafy stage, which develops from the secondary protonema as a lateral bud. They consist of the upright, slender axis bearing a spirally arranged leaves. They are attached to the soil through the multicellular and branch rhizoids. This stage bears the sex organs. The vegetative reproduction in a mosses is by the fragmentation, and budding is a secondary protonema. In sexual reproduction, the sex organ Antheridia and Archegonia are produced at the apex of the leafy shoot. After fertilization, the zygote develops into the sporophyte consisting of the food seta and the capsule. The sporophyte in mosses is more elaborated than that of the liverworts. The capsule contains the spores. The spores are formed after the meiosis. The mosses have an elaborate mechanism of the spore dispersal. The common example of the mosses are the funaria, polytrichum and the sphagnum, etc. Now the 3.3 is the pteridophytes. Pteridophytes include the horsetail and the ferns. The pteridophytes are used for the medicinal purposes and as a soil binders. They are also frequently grown as ornamentals. Evolutionary, they are the first terrestrial plant to possess the vascular tissues, that is the xylem and the phloem. They shall study the more about these tissues in chapter number 6. The pteridophytes are found in the cool, damp, shady places, though some may be flourish well in the sandy soil conditions. You may recall that the bryophytes are the dominant phase in the life cycle is the gametophytic plant body. However, in the pteridophyte, the main plant body is a sporophyte, which is differentiated into the true root, stem and the leaves. These organs possess the well differentiated vascular tissues. The leaves in the pteridophytes are the small, that is the microsporophyll, as in the selaginella, or larger known as the macrophylls, as in the ferns. The sporophytes bears the sporangia that are subtended by the leaf-like appendages called as the sporophytes. In some cases, the sporophyte may form the distinct compact structures called as the strobili or cones, known as the selaginella or equisetum. The sporangia produces the spores by meiosis in spore mother cell. The spore germinate to give rise to the inconspicuous, small but multicellular, free-living and mostly the photosynthetic thalloid gametophyte called as a prothallus. This gametophyte requires the cool, damp, shady places to grow. Because of this specific restricted requirement and the need for the water for fertilization, the spread of the living pteridophyte is limited and restricted to the narrow geographical regions. The gametophyte bears a male and the female sex organ called as Antheridia and Archegonia respectively. Water is required for the transfer of antherozoids, the male gamete released from the Antheridia to the mouth of the Archegonia. The fusion of the male gametes with the egg present in the Archegonium results in the formation of the zygote. Now zygote thereafter produce the multicellular, well differentiated sporophyte, which is the dominant phase of the pteridophyte. In majority of the pteridophyte, all the spores are the similar kind, such a plant are called as a homosporous. Genera like the Selaginella and the Salvia, which produces the two kinds of the spore, that is the macro, that is the larger, and micro, that is the smaller spores, are known as the heterosporous. The megaspores and the microspore germinate and give rise to the female and the male gametophyte respectively. The female gametophyte in this plant is retained on the present sporophyte for the variable periods. The development of the zygote into the young embryos take place within the female gametophyte. This event is the precursor of the seed habits considered as important steps in the evolution. The Pteridophytes are further classified into the 4 classes, that is the Psilopsida in the Xylodon, then the Lycopsida, for example the Selaginella, Lycopodium, Sphenopsida, for example the Equisetum, Pteropsida, that for example the Bryophytes, Pterips and the Adiantum. Now the 3.4 is the Gymnosperm. Gymnosperm, gymnos means the naked and the sperma means the seeds, are the plant in which the ovules are not enclosed by any ovary wall and remain exposed both before and after fertilization. The seeds that develops post fertilization are not covered, that is, are naked. The gymnosperm include the medium sized trees or tall trees and shrubs. One of the gymnosperm is a giant redwood tree, that is the Sequoia semiparvensis, is one of the tallest tree species. The roots are the generally taproot system. The roots are the roots in the some genera have the fungal association in the form of the mycorrhiza, for example in case of Pinus, while in some other, for example in Cycas, small specialized roots are called as the colloid roots, are associated with the nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria. The stems are the unbranched in Cycas or branched in the Pinus and the Cedrus. The leaves may be simple or compound. In Cycas, the pinnately leaves persist for a few years, and leaves in the gymnosperm are well adapted to withstand the extremes of temperature, humidity and the wind. In conifers, the needle-like leaves reduces the surface area. Their thick cuticle and the sunken stomata also helps to reduce the water loss. The gymnosperm are the heterosporous. They produce the haploid microspore and the megaspore. The two kinds of the spores are produced within the sporangium that are borne on the sporophyll, which are arranged spirally along an axis to form a lax or a compact strobilus or cone. The strobili bearing a microsporophyll and the microsporangium are called as a microsporangiates or a male strobili. The microspore develop into the male gametophytic generation, which is a highly reduced and is confined to only a limited numbers of the cell. This reduced gametophyte is called as a pollen grains. The development of the pollen grain takes place within the microsporangium, the cone bearing the megasporophyll with ovules or megasporophylls or megasporangium are called as a macrosporangiates or female strobili. The male and the female cone or the strobili may be born on the same tree, for example Pinus. However, in the Cycas, male cone and the megasporophyll are born on the different trees. The megaspore mother cell is differentiated from the one of the cell of the nucellus. The nucellus is protected by the envelope and composite structure called as ovule. The ovules are born on a megasporophyll which may be clustered to form the female cones. The megaspore mother cell divides meiotically to form the 4 megaspores. One of the megaspore enclosed within the megasporangium develops into the multicellular female gametophyte that bears the 2 or the more archegonia or female sex organs. The multicellular female gametophyte is also retained within the megasporangium. Unlike the Bryophytes and the Pteridophytes, in gymnosperm the male and the female gametophyte do not have an independent free living existence. They remain within the sporangia, retained on the sporophytes. The pollen grain is released from the microsporangium. They are carried in the air currents and come in the contact with the opening of the ovule born on the megasporophyll. The pollen tube carried the male gametes grow towards the archegonia in the ovule and discharge their contents near the mouth of the archegonia. Following the fertilization, the zygote develops into the embryo and the ovule into the seed. These seeds are not covers. Now 3.5 is the angiosperm. Unlike the gymnosperm where the ovules are naked, in the angiosperm or the flowering plants, the pollen grains and the ovules are developed in the specialized structures called as a flower. In angiosperm, the seeds are enclosed in the fruits. Angiosperm are the exceptionally large groups of the plant occurring in a wide range of the habitat. They range in the size from the smallest wolffia to the tall tree that is of the eucalyptus over 100 meters. They provide us with a food, fodder, fuel, medicines and the several other commercial important products. They are divided into the two classes, the dicotyledons and the monocotyledons. The dicotyledons are characterized by the seeds having the two cotyledons, reticulate venation in the leaves, and the tetramerous or pentamerous flowers, that is having a 4 and 5 members in each floral hose. The monocotyledon on the other hand are characterized by the single cotyledon seed, parallel venation in leaves and the trimerous flowers having the 3 members in each floral hose. The male sex organ in the flower is a stamen, and each stamen consists of the slender filament with and the anther at the tip. Within the anther, the pollen mother cell divide by the meiosis to produce the microspore which mature into the pollen grains. The female sex organ in a flower is a pistil. The pistil consists of the solan ovary at its base, a long slender style and the stigma. Inside the ovary, ovules. Generally, each ovule has a megaspore mother cell that undergoes the meiosis to form the 4 haploid megaspores. 3 of them degenerate and 1 divides to form the embryo sac, and each embryo sac has the 3 cells, that is the egg apparatus, 1 egg cell, egg apparatus having the 1 egg cell and the 2 synergids, then 3 antipodal cells and 2 polar nuclei are present. The polar nuclei eventually fuse to form the diploid secondary nucleus, and pollen grain after the dispersal from the anther are carried by the wind and various other agencies to the stigma of the pistil. This term as a pollination. The pollen grain germinate on the stigma and the resulting pollen tubes grows through the tissues of the stigma and styles and reach the ovules. The pollen tubes enter the embryo sac where the 2 male gametes are discharged. One of the male gamete fuses with the egg cell, that is the syngamy, to form the zygote. The other male gamete fuses with the diploid secondary nucleus to produce a triploid primary endosperm nucleus, that is the pen. Primary endosperm nucleus, it is in short known as a pen. Because of the occurrence of the 2 fusion, that is the syngamy and the triple fusion, this event termed as a double fertilization as event unique to the angiosperm. The zygote develops into an embryo that is with 1 or the 2 cotyledons, and the pen, that is the primary endosperm nucleus, is develops into the endosperm which provides the nourishment to the developing embryo. The synergid and the antipodal degenerate after the fertilization. During these events, the ovules develops into the seeds and the ovaries develop into the fruits. The life cycle of an angiosperm is shown in the figure. Now the 3.6 says the plant life cycle and the alteration of the generation. In plants, both the haploid and the diploid cells can be divided by mitosis. This ability to leads the formation of the different plant bodies, haploid and the diploid. The haploid plant body produces the gametes by mitosis. This plant body represent the gametophyte. Following the fertilization, the zygote also divides by the mitosis to produce the diploid sporophytic plant body. Haploid spores are produced by this plant body by meiosis, and this turns divides by the mitosis to form the haploid plant body once again. Thus, during the life cycle of any sexual reproducing plants, there is the alteration of the generation between the gamete producing haploid gametophyte and the spore producing diploid sporophyte. However, the different plant groups as well as the individual representing them differ in the following patterns. First is a sporophytic generation is represented only by the one cell zygote. There are no free living sporophyte. Meiosis in the zygote result in the formation of the haploid spore. The haploid spore divides mitotically and forms the gametophyte. The dominant photosynthetic phase in such a plant is a free living gametophyte, and this kind of the life cycle is a term as a haplontic. Many algae such as the Liverworts, Spirogyra and some species of the Chlamydomonas represent this pattern. Second is on the other extreme is a type wherein the diploid sporophyte is a dominant photosynthetic independent phase of the plant. The gametophytic phase is represented by the single of the few cell haploid gametophyte, and this kind of the life cycle is a term as a diplontic. And algae, for example the fucus species, represent this pattern. In addition, all seed bearing plants, for example that is the Gymnosperm and the Angiosperm, follow this pattern with some variation wherein the gametophytic phase is a few to the multicell. Third is the Bryophytes and the Pteridophytes. Interestingly, exhibiting and the intermediate condition, that is the haplodiplontic, both phases are the multicellular. However, they differ in their dominant phases. A dominant independent photosynthetic thalloid or erect phase is represented by the haploid gametophyte, and it alternates with the short-lived multicellular sporophyte. Totally or partially depends on the gametophyte for its anchorage and the nutrition. All bryophytes represent this pattern. The diploid sporophyte is represented by the dominant independent photosynthetic vascular plant body. It alternates with the multicellular sporophytic or autotrophic independent but short-lived haploid gametophyte. Such a pattern is known as a haplodiplontic life cycle. All pteridophytes exhibit this pattern. Interestingly, while most algal genera are haplontic, some of them such as the Ectocarpus, Polysiphonia, kelp are the haplodiplontic. Fucus and algae is a diplontic. Now the summary of the chapter number 3 is a plant kingdom. Plant kingdom includes the algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperm and angiosperm. Algae are the chlorophyll bearing, simple thalloid, heterotrophic and the largely aquatic organism. Depending on the type of the pigment possessed, the type of the store food, algae are classified into the 3 classes, namely the chlorophyceae, phaeophyceae and the rhodophyceae. Algae usually reproduce vegetatively by the fragmentation, or sexually by formation of the different types of spores, and sexually by the formation of the gametes, which may also the isogamy, anisogamy and oogamy. Bryophytes are the plants which are live in a soil but are depending on the water for the sexual reproduction. Their plant body is more differentiated than that of the algae. It is the thallus-like, prostrate or erect and attached to the substratum by the rhizoids. They possess the root-like, leaf-like, stem-like structures. The bryophytes are divided into liverworts and the mosses. The plant body of the liverwort is a thalloid and dorsiventrally, whereas the mosses have the upright, slender axis bearing a spirally arranged leaves. The main plant body of the bryophyte is a gamete producing and is called as a gametophyte. It bears the male sex organ called as the antheridia and the female sex organ called as the archegonia. The male and the female gamete produces the fuse to form a zygote which produces a multicellular body called as a sporophyte. It produces haploid spores. The spores germinate to form the gametophyte. In pteridophyte, the main plant body is a sporophyte which is differentiated into the true root, stem and the leaves. This organ possesses the well differentiated vascular tissues. The sporophyte bears the sporangia which produce the spores. The spore germinate to form the gametophyte which requires the cool, damp places to grow. The gametophyte bears the male and the female sex organ called as antheridia and archegonia respectively. Water is required for the transfer of the male gamete to the archegonia, whereas the zygote is formed after the fertilization. The zygote produces the sporophytes. The gymnosperm are the plants in which the ovules are not enclosed by any ovary wall. After fertilization, the seed remain exposed and therefore these plants are called as a naked seeded plant. The gymnosperm produces the microspore and the megaspore, which are produced in a microsporangia and the megasporangia born on the sporophylls. The sporophyll, microsporophylls and megasporophylls are arranged spirally on axis to form a male and the female cone respectively. The pollen grain germinate and the pollen tube release the male gamete into the ovules, where it fuses with the egg cell is in archegonia. Following the fertilization, the zygote develops into the embryo and the ovule into the seeds. In angiosperm, the male sex organ, that is the stamen, and the female sex organ known as a pistil are born in the flower. Each stamen consists of the filament and an anther. Another produces the pollen grains, that is the male gametophyte, after the meiosis. The pistil consists of an ovary enclosing the one to many ovules. Within the ovule is the female gametophyte or embryo sac, which contains the egg cell. The pollen tube enters the embryo sac where two male gametes are discharged. One male gamete fuses with the egg cell, that is the syngamy, and other fuse with the diploid secondary nucleus, that is the triple fusion. This phenomenon of the two fusions is called as a double fertilization and is a unique angiosperm and is unique to the angiosperm. The angiosperms are divided into the two classes, the dicotyledons and monocotyledons. During the life cycle of the any sexual reproduction plant, sexually reproducing plants, there are the alternation of generation between the gamete producing the haploid gametophyte and spore producing diploid sporophyte. However, different plant groups as well as the individuals may show the different patterns of the life cycle, that is the haplontic, diplontic or intermediate, or maybe it may be called as a haplodiplontic. Thank you so much.